In Module 10, we revisit the control function to look a bit more closely at organisational performance and corporate social responsibility. In Part 1 of the Module 10 lecture, I will be looking a bit more closely at organisational performance, including consideration of stakeholders that play a role in determining what is meant by performance. In the previous lecture on control, we looked at ways performance is tracked or monitored within organisations. How about if we want to know how the organisation overall is tracking? To track or monitor overall organisational performance, we first need to consider what it is that we mean by organisational performance. Organisational performance concerns the value created by the organisation using the resources that they have effectively and efficiently. While all types of organisations are concerned with efficiency and effectiveness, different kinds of organisations define value in different ways. For example, a corporate organisation has a different idea of value than a non-profit organisation. Non-profit organisations often understand value in terms of contributing to community or society. For example, the Australian Red Cross provides relief such as shelter, food or medical help in times of crisis and care. Value for the Australian Red Cross is understood in terms of creating a service that helps to support the way people live and the quality of their life. One way that organisational performance is understood is in terms of productivity. In the figure on this slide, productivity is mapped in terms of efficiency, or resource use, and effectiveness, or goal attainment. These different aspects of organisational performance provide an overall picture of organisational performance. In the top right-hand quadrant, we have high productivity, while in the bottom left quadrant, we have low productivity. The top left represents effective performance, while the bottom right quadrant refers to efficient performance. Performance effectiveness is an output measure of tasks or goal accomplishment. This type of performance asks how appropriate organisational goals are and how well organisations are at achieving those goals. For example, how well is the organisation doing in terms of market position? Performance efficiency is a measure of resource cost associated with goal accomplishment. This type of performance asks, how much does it cost to achieve our goals? For example, the cost of labour. We will be looking at the external environment more in the next module, but we will be briefly looking at it in this module because the nature of the external environment can influence both how much information is available to measure performance, as well as what determines what is meant by valuable or successful performance. In order to measure performance, organisations need information. Yet organisations often operate in complex environments that are dynamic or change frequently, which leads to a high degree of uncertainty where information can be difficult to obtain. For example, an organisation in a highly complex environment where the economy is unstable, governments or politics change a lot, and there's a lot of competitors, maybe some from around the world, and where change happens frequently, it can be difficult for organisations to get information to judge the performance. It can be difficult to anticipate or predict what performance levels are needed to perform successfully, and organisations have to expend more resources towards addressing the external environment. The diagram on this slide illustrates how the complexity of the environment and how frequently the environment changes influences the degree of uncertainty in the environment. The degree of uncertainty in the environment can also influence what is meant by valuable or successful performance. In highly uncertain environments, organisations have to expend resources and focus on addressing issues and the needs of different groups or stakeholders in the external environment. This means that external groups or stakeholders become important in deciding what is valuable or successful performance. For example, in highly competitive environments, customers become very important as different organisations compete for customer business. This means that organisations in these environments include measures of customer satisfaction or market share as important indicators of successful performance. Some of the most dramatic coverage of organisational performance is when organisations are poorly performing. This could be organisations that have poor performance in the market, so they're not doing well financially. For example, as the world became digital, Kodak had poor financial performance and went bankrupt in 2012. Poor performance could also concern poor social performance, such as when the garment factory outside Dhaka in Bangladesh collapsed and killed over 1,000 workers due to unsafe working conditions. Poor performance could also concern the poor performance of employees. For example, if employees are absent a lot, or maybe they're producing poor quality outcomes. So what kinds of controls can organisations use to manage poor organisational performance? To manage organisational performance, organisations could use information and financial controls, such as liquidity, which tells an organisation what their ability to pay their bills are, which is why business students study accounting. Organisations can also use purchasing controls to reduce the amount of stock the company has to store, such as used in just-in-time scheduling, or inventory controls or quality controls, such as the ISO 9000 accreditation standards or Six Sigma programs. Poor employee performance is managed through employee discipline systems, such as reprimands, warnings, or penalties. In order for people to perform effectively, people need the right information at the right time. Organisations use information systems to collect and collate data to provide information about how the organisation is performing. Not all information or data is the same. Some is more useful than others. So what is useful information? Let's consider a university report as an example to consider the following 5 essential characteristics of useful information. Firstly, information needs to be timely. So timely information for a university report is the reports, books or websites that we can access that help to explain topics and support our ideas about a topic. Secondly, we need quality information. Quality information for a university report are the credible sources of information that we demonstrate through listing references, so using our textbooks or journal articles rather than Wikipedia. Third, we need completeness. Complete information for a university report includes sources that cover original ideas as well as the most up-to-date research on that topic. Fourth, information needs to be relevant. Relevant information is the information that helps the person put together the information so that they can make a judgment call. So for a university report, information that is about the topic the report is covering would be considered relevant information. Finally, we need our information to be understandable. Understandable information for a university report is the information that provides different perspectives that allows students to synthesise and summarise information into something meaningful. So, who decides what kind of performance is important to track? Earlier I mentioned that in highly uncertain environments, different groups or stakeholders play a role in defining or determining what is meant by successful performance. In addition, increasingly a much broader group of people and groups are interested in monitoring the performance of an organisation. This broader group is generally understood as organisational stakeholders. Organisational stakeholders are defined as those directly affected by the behaviour of the organisation and hold a stake in its performance. Organisational stakeholders may include the government, competitors, shareholders, customers, suppliers, pressure groups and regulators. For example, stakeholders for Australian universities could include governments. Stakeholders for universities could include other universities that they work in collaboration with through joint projects. It could include students, employees, textbook suppliers, the people that print exam booklets, the learning management system designers, the education accreditation groups. On this slide we can see a number of different stakeholders. The organisational stakeholders that organisations deem important influence how broadly organisational performance is defined, or the degree to which organisations include social responsibility into their understandings of performance. If organisations focus on owners or shareholders, then it is likely that organisational performance is going to focus on economic or financial concerns. In contrast, at the other end of the diagram, if organisations are focusing on broader society, they are likely to have a broad definition of performance that understands organisational performance in terms of social responsibility. In the last part of this lecture, we'll look a bit more closely at one of those stakeholders, the owners or shareholders. Owners or shareholders have a special legal relationship with organisations that are incorporated. So that is organisations that are a corporation. For organisations that are corporations, legal control systems are built into the organisation structure. This is through the corporate governance system. Corporate governance involves a board of directors that has a legal responsibility for monitoring organisational performance. For incorporated organisations, the government may hold board members personally responsible for some poor organisational performance. In Australia, the Corporations Act from 2001 holds directors on the board responsible for strategic planning and monitoring performance. Increasing issues with poor organisational performance has led to calls to improve corporate governance systems to allow for greater transparency and accountability. The Australian Stock Exchange has developed a number of principles that they recommend organisations follow. On the next slide are listed some of those Australian Stock Exchange or ASX principles. So on this slide we can see some of those governance principles recommended by the ASX that have been established to help companies improve their corporate governance. Boards are required to sign off that they are adhering to these ASX principles. As we can see, the principles cover recommendations about how organisations should structure the board, what kinds of members to include, as well as how many board members. The principles cover recommendations about the leadership roles and responsibilities in the organisation. The principles cover recommendations about how decision-making should occur, and the types of measures and reports or controls that the organisation should adopt in monitoring or measuring performance. The principles even cover pay or remuneration arrangements for the human resources within an organisation. While ASX principles influence how organisations define, measure and report on organisational performance, you can see that these understandings also have implications for the way organisations are managed. In conclusion to Part 1 of the lecture on Module 10, developing effective and appropriate controls requires consideration of how organisational performance is understood. Organisational performance can be understood in narrow or broad terms depending on which organisational stakeholders are most important in determining organisational performance. This brings us to the end of Part 1 of the lecture on organisational performance and corporate social responsibility.